Let's just talk briefly about the definition of identity, because we don't really, when we raise our kids and stuff, we don't really talk about that. We talk about, what do you like to do? What's your favorite sport? What are you going to
Hmm.
be when you grow up? But we don't really say, who are you at your core? Like, and so what does that mean? What does identity
Yeah.
mean to you, Dr. Moyer?
Well, that's a really great question.
I know.
The whenever I first started looking at identity as part of my PhD program, I was looking actually for that definition.
Yeah.
In so many places, they talk about identity and then they just talk about either it is what you do, it is where you come from. And other places, they may get a little bit deeper. They may talk about this is your purpose. This is kind of your worldview, things like that.
Mhm.
And as I did my research, it seemed to come to a point where there wasn't one real clear definition. And so I decided I would kind of put one out there and see and kind of show how it fits. And so the definition that we came up with was identity is the set of principles, perspectives, purposes, and priorities. We call those the four P's that we
Mhm.
hold at our core that end up defining or influencing everything that we think, say, or do.
I like that.
So it gets beyond the surface or the external, because one of the things I learned from psychology with identity is identity isn't what we do. What we do is kind of the expression of our identity.
Yeah.
And so I wanted the definition to be what is at the core, what is at the center of those things that influence all of that. And so we came up with those four P's.
I like that. One of the definitions that I read that helped me is this struggling, like overcoming codependency and people pleasing and, all these sorts of things,
Hmm.
was identity is something that remains consistent regardless of circumstances. And that to me was whoa, because for me, my self-esteem, like if our self-esteem, meaning how we feel about ourselves and our self-efficacy, in other words, the belief that we can do things, if that is
Hmm.
tied to identity, and if identity is tied
Yeah.
to performance, I was up
Right.
and down and up and down and up and down and up and down all the time. And
Yeah.
my identity, like at least my feelings, were always fluctuating based on what other people were doing or saying or how I performed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And see, in that idea, that definition of what do you hold consistent,
Mm-hmm.
that could be like in your case, your perspective. I mean, that's kind of like where I always get back to is like, where does it fit into one of those four P's? And this idea of self-efficacy or
Yeah.
where to locus of control is a lot about perspective.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Am I am I the person that is in charge, or am I really looking for other people? Am I
Yeah.
looking to the outside? Am I looking for the validation of other individuals? So where do I have the control here in myself, or am I giving that control over to other people?
Yeah. And this is a tough one too, because, we were talking about self esteem and God esteem. And,
Hmm.
we're both Christians talking about identity and locus of control, which basically means if I'm an external locus of control, then my self esteem is regulated by things outside of
Hmm.
myself, which is pretty much how I lived. And then they call it like free floating anxiety, where, oh, the boss's door's closed, they must be talking about me, things like that. Whereas
Hmm.
internal is where we want to be, where we're guided by our internal, but where does that leave God? And I think that's where we were just talking about this, like, how do you explain that in a biblical perspective that doesn't make everyone mad? Because from a Christian perspective, we are created by God, we are given our identity by God, and all of that stuff. But that doesn't mean we're not in a world of sin and we don't get corrupted. And you know what I mean? So I
Hmm.
kind of like
Oh,
how you
absolutely.
were describing how those fit together in a way that doesn't doesn't make everybody mad in the church, you know what I mean? Because this is an important piece because it's yeah, we're all those things that God says we are, but like you said, it's a list of things.
Well, and that's one of the, as I was looking at this in the redeeming identity, you used a word that I actually use a lot in the book, is this idea of corrupted identity. Is that we world where we've basically created our own identity.
Mm,
We've constructed our own set of principles. We've constructed our own set of perspectives that we use to view the world and to interpret the circumstances that we're in. The beauty of what God did in salvation is he says, I'm giving you a new identity.
hmm
Making you a new creation. I'm making you something new. And so many times, what I've seen in people whenever I've talked with them about identity is they get this idea that, okay, everything needs to change all at the same time. And if they don't get that feeling or they don't see that, they either get very frustrated because they're not getting that experience, or they become legalistic because they think, well, then I have to create it.
Oh gosh.
And the term that I like using, and I credit this to a good friend who's a pastor who says, what we're living is we have to live in the tension of the already but not yet. It's the idea that that from God's perspective,
hmm
we've been changed. He's given us the new identity. He has called us into what he wants us to be. But like you said, we still struggle with those patterns that we have developed over decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we still have to learn how to put off that old identity, those old patterns, those old principles, those old perspectives, and replace those with the new. But that's not an immediate, all at one time thing. That would just be overwhelming for us.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, if you just imagine if, like, the moment you got saved, your entire brain structure got completely changed, that would be overwhelming. But what he does is he walks with us in a process of transformation, not just a single moment.
Yeah. Wow. That's so true. I was I forget who said it. It was in a book, but it's basically God doesn't give us a new identity, but he unveils who we
There's a
really
good
are, or
that's
something like that. It was really beautifully
yeah.
said. But the idea being, we're all unique. For
Hmm.
me, when I became a Christian, a lot of what God did was take me back to when I was little. What
Hmm.
did you love? Like I was still there. Who were you then? So I always think of recovery as is coming back to ourself because we don't a lot of times we don't know who we are because if we have trauma
Absolutely.
attachment disorders. I probably say this like every show, but we stuff who we are. Oh, Eric, you can't get a PhD. You're not smart enough, and in fact you can't be a firefighter, and stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, right? And so you put all that away because you
Hmm.
choose the love. Like there was that doctor that said we need love and attachment and authenticity, but we will choose the attachment before the
Hmm.
authenticity because we need
Yeah.
that love. And then we grow up and we're like kind of what I was doing. We're just trying to, I don't know what my morals are. I don't know what my real goals are, right? Doctor, I'm looking for you to tell me what they are, right? And that can be how a lot of people grow up, especially like with PTSD and
Hmm.
stuff like that. They just
Oh
either they
yeah.
take control right or they just they don't believe they have any choices, and I think that's the core of the piece where I always feel like with the church and identity and stuff is you gotta get into some of this stuff because it's a fallen world and there is this trauma and loss of identity and belief that we don't have autonomy over ourselves. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
That was a lot
Oh
I just
yeah.
said.
And there's a lot there that is so true though, because you're right. We look for attachment. And I think people either, I read in a book that people a lot of the time either look for attachment or they look for control.